Figure if I'm going to do a political commentary show, I should cover what's in my own backyard. Okay, Alameda City Council election 2020. We got 2 seats up for grabs on our 5-member city council. The 3 seats that are not up for grabs are held by conservative Tony Daysog and consistent progressive votes Mayor Marilyn Ashcraft and city council member John Knox White. So we have 5 candidates for the 2 city council seats. Let's start with Malia Vella and Jim Oddie. I think it's fair to talk about them together. They are the incumbents, and they are in and of themselves very similar to each other on policy, but they're very different from their 3 challengers. So, Malia and Jim pass the litmus test of being both yes on Z. They are also the only candidates who are yes on Z. Zero shame if you're not an expert on Measure Z. I already made a video on that. Check it out. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume you know what Z is all about. Now, because of Malia and Jim's leadership, in just the past few years, we've gotten an increase in the minimum wage to $15 an hour before the state, an end to no-cause evictions, grants to small businesses hurt by COVID, a cap on rent increases at 70% of the CPI, which this year translates to about 2.5%. At least that was until we got a moratorium on rent increases and evictions through the end of 2020 due to the pandemic, improved roads, an end to loopholes so that people in Section 8 subsidized housing have the same protections that the rest of us renters do. In other words, in a very short amount of time, we've made a ton of progress here in Alameda. And these policies have objectively helped the lives of the most vulnerable people in our community. And that's why big money hates Oddie and Vella. I can speak from experience on how these policies actually affect your life. Rent control has eased the financial stress of living month to month. And an end to no-cause evictions gives us a sense of security that we're not just going to be kicked out because of the whims of a landlord. One of the things I genuinely appreciate about Jim Oddie is that he was not always on our side when it comes to housing. He was not always as pro-tenant as he is now, but he listened to the public. He was not always on our side when it comes to policing. He went to the protests, the awesome demonstrations that high schoolers and the local Black Lives Matter put on. He listened, and now he's more on our side. And Malia Vella, she kicks ass. I think she is the strongest advocate for us in this election. And I hope to one day see her in Congress. She's an incredibly intelligent, strong person. And when it comes to representation, Malia Vella is the only person in my generation that has any chance of getting on council. And plus, she's a feminist and a woman of color. I imagine that for a lot of people, that'd be super important to have that representation on our city council. And Jim Oddie's gay. So both are positives for representation. So yeah, they're awesome. Now we come to our 3 challengers. I call him Trig White. Our first challenger is Amos White. Now, I know Amos, and he's a nice guy. And you look at that smile, and you tell me that you don't feel a little bit better about your day just looking at that smile. Ultimately, though, I struggle with Amos's strong rhetoric on racism and policing, with his moderate policy positions and his no-on-Z stance. I fear ultimately that his rhetoric amounts to radical platitudes, especially because Amos has been endorsed by Alameda Citizens Task Force. ACT is an elitist group which includes the Lindsay in Gallagher and Lindsay. And Gallagher and Lindsay, for context, is the biggest corporate landlord in Alameda. Lindsay's kind of like the Koch brother of Alameda, and he has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting against any rights and protections for tenants. Amos is also endorsed by the conservative East Bay Times. The other candidate that East Bay Times endorsed was Gig Codiga, a literal Republican. Our 4th person running is Trish Spencer. Now, Trish served 1 term as mayor, and there's a reason she only served 1 term. She was a disaster as mayor. The way that she ran city council meetings were disorganized, they were rambling, and she would often push the most important items to the end of a city council meeting in order to discourage public comment. She voted against increasing the minimum wage. She was yes on K, which was a ballot measure in 2018, which was an attempt by corporate landlords to change our city charter. When I say city charter, think of like a city constitution. Trish Spencer is also no on Z. A couple years ago, she was the leader of the opposition to a respite center for emergency care for the homeless, for old people, and for veterans. Her argument was that homeless people will infect Crab Cove, where families will see them. The utter lack of humanity. Final city council candidate is Gig Codiga. Now, this guy is running on a platform of we need more cops because of all the violence in Alameda? Codiga is also no on Z. And get this, you ready for the kicker? Gig Codiga is a registered Republican. Now, don't tell me he isn't like one of those Republicans. The Republican Party has a 94% approval rating of Donald Trump. Alameda is basically a one-party city, completely ruled by Democrats. So he's making the conscious decision to stay in the party of Trump. Now, I'll give him credit on this front. He's at least up front. I would prefer that a Republican register as a Republican and be upfront about being a Republican rather than, say, pretending to be a Democrat. I won't pretend that I don't have a bias towards helping the most vulnerable in our community. Vote Malia Vella and Jim Oddie for City Council in Alameda. This is Alien Perspective. Thanks for watching.